Hello everyone, welcome again to Naval's channel. I'm teaching astrology in a series of lessons. This is the third lesson where we'll be talking about the houses on the astrological chart. If you don't know what your astrological chart is, you can watch my previous videos, right? In the past video, in the last one, we talked about the first 4 houses in the astrological chart. Now in this video, we'll be covering the next 4. Okay, so as you know, there are 12 houses. We covered first 4 last time, right? If you want to know about them, you can watch the previous video. Now the scope of this video will be limited to the next 4 houses, which are 5, 6, 7th and 8th. So let's discuss the 5th house first of all. What does 5th house represent? It represents your kids. It talks about your preliminary education, so which means your high school, not your graduate or undergraduate degree. It also talks about your love life. It also talks about your the gain of real estate, things you like to do, right? Some people like cars, some people like airplanes, some people like birds, right? Study of birds and all that kind of stuff. So it also talks about kind of things you enjoy. It's not the only house which talks about the things you enjoy, but it's one of the major houses. Okay, moving to 6th house. What does 6th house represent? The most important thing is your health diseases, particularly. The spelling are wrong, but it's okay. All right. It also talks about your job, not the business but the job. So it's work, which is a service, not a business. 6th house also represents your sports. So career in sports is looked through 6th house, not just through 6th house, but 6th house is the major contributor in the career in sport. 6th house also represents any litigations, any like court cases. 6th house also represents your enemies. All right, moving to 7th house. What does 7th house represents? The major signification of the 7th house is marriage. 7th house represents your wife, or I would say spouse. So in the case of the girl, it represents your husband. 7th house also represents business. Remember, 6th house represents work and the job. 7th house represents business, any partnerships. I apologize for my handwriting and spelling mistakes here. So 7th house, yeah, as I said, represents your partnerships also. All right. 8th house. What do 8th house represent? It represents anything which happens immediately, like accidents. 8th house is the most secretive house in all the houses. So it represents any mysteries or secrets. It represents hidden facts, like the career of a detective would be seen through 8th house, or career of a researcher would be seen through 8th house. So these things, right? 8th house also represents astrology, as astrology is also esoteric or hidden. So 8th house represents that too. Death, right? Anything which happens immediately, anything which surprises you, 8th house represents that thing. 8th house also represents lotteries. 5th house represents your kids, your anything you enjoy. 5th house is one of the best houses in the astrological chart. 6th house represents your litigations, your health, your sports, your enemies. 7th house represents your marriage, your wife, right? If you remember, 1st house represented you, right? If you see my previous video, 1st house represented you. 7th house is directly opposite to 1st house. It represents your other half, your spouse. Now, 8th house represents your accidents, mysteries, astrology, death. Now, if you see here, let me just rub this so I can explain this a little better. All right. So this is how the chart looks like, right? This is one of the kind of a key how to learn what any house represents. Like there are houses opposite to each other, like 1st and 7th house, right? 2nd and 8th house, 3rd and 9th house. Then there are houses, right? Like 4th and 10th house. So 1st house represents you. 7th house represents your spouse or outside world. If you meet other people in this world, those all represents 7th house from your perspective, right? 2nd house is your family, right? Now 7th house is your 8th house is your spouse's family, right? 2nd house from any house represents the gain of that house or the family of that house. 8th house is 2nd to 7th house, so it represents family of your spouse. Do not just cram the significations of each house. Try to understand why I am saying so. Okay. 3rd house represents speech, right? It represents short-term travels. If you remember, just see my 2nd video. It represents short-term travels. Now, opposite to the 3rd house is 9th house, right? Just corresponding. 9th house would represent long-term travels, just as simple as that. 4th house, if you represent, it talks about your mother, right? Now, what would the 10th house represent? Exactly opposite to each other, the father, as simple as that. So that's all for this video. Basically, we discussed about 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th house. In my next video, I'll be talking about 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. If you have any questions or comments, suggestions, just leave a comment below the video, okay? If you like these videos and want to learn more about it, just subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.